The millionaire CEO thought he was sitting down to a quiet dinner alone, until three identical 6-year-old boys approached his table, handed him a letter from their late mother, and told him something that shattered everything he thought he knew about his past. She said, "You're our dad." Noah Harris was accustomed to the controlled chaos of his daily life. At 38, he had achieved more than most people could dream of, becoming a millionaire and a respected CEO whose decisions could shift entire industries overnight. His days were structured to the minute: meetings, phone calls, financial reports, and negotiations. There was rarely time for rest, and even when he sat down to dinner at his favorite upscale restaurant, his mind rarely switched off. Tonight, though, Noah decided to give himself a rare pause, just an hour, perhaps, to simply enjoy good food and temporary silence. He sat at a corner table by the large window, overlooking the busy city street below, sipping a glass of expensive red wine. The evening was clear, and the lights of passing cars blurred slightly through the glass, creating a soothing rhythm. Noah felt the tension in his shoulders ease a little, and he allowed himself the luxury of not thinking about tomorrow's agenda. But the calm was abruptly broken when he noticed three small figures approaching his table. Initially, he assumed they belonged to another family dining nearby, until it became clear that the children were coming directly towards him. They were identical, three little boys, probably no older than 6 years old. Each of them had thick chestnut hair, combed neatly but somehow still a bit messy, and matching jackets zipped up against the evening chill. Their eyes immediately caught Noah's attention: gray-green, serious, and disturbingly familiar. In fact, they mirrored his own so precisely that it felt like looking into three tiny mirrors reflecting his past. He set his glass down carefully, confused, curious, and somehow uneasy as they stopped at his table. One of them, the tallest by perhaps an inch, held out a slightly crumpled envelope. His small hand trembled just a little as he spoke. "Our mom said we had to give you this if anything ever happened to her. Now she won't wake up," he said quietly, voice barely above a whisper. Noah stared at the child, momentarily unable to comprehend what he was hearing. He slowly took the envelope, feeling the weight of it settle in his palm as he tried to process the boy's words. The other two boys stood closely behind their brother, eyes wide and anxious, but silent. Noah felt the gazes of other diners beginning to turn their way, whispers rising gently around him, and an intense urge to protect these children, even though he didn't fully understand who they were yet, rose suddenly within him. "Sit down, please," he said softly, gesturing to the chairs around his table. The boys obeyed silently, shuffling awkwardly onto the oversized chairs, feet dangling above the polished wooden floor. Noah opened the letter carefully, his fingers strangely unsteady as he pulled out the neatly folded piece of paper. He recognized the handwriting immediately. His heartbeat quickened painfully as he read. "Noah, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here. For 6 years, I've asked nothing of you, but now I must. These boys, they are your sons. They deserve to know their father, and you deserve to know them. I'm so sorry I kept them from you. Please forgive me. Jessica." Jessica. The name hit him harder than he could have anticipated. Memories flashed rapidly through his mind: her laugh, her gentle voice, the quiet moments they'd spent together 7 years ago. He had thought about her often, wondered why she'd suddenly vanished from his life, why his calls and messages had gone unanswered after his business trip overseas. Eventually, he'd convinced himself she had simply moved on without him. Now, sitting across from him were three identical reminders of the life he had missed, a life that had been hidden from him, suddenly unveiled by tragedy. The tallest boy shifted nervously in his chair, his small voice hesitant. "Mom told us you were strong and that you might be scared, but she said we could trust you." Noah felt something deep within him fracture at those words. His throat tightened painfully, and he forced himself to breathe steadily. He knew what these children represented: responsibility, uncertainty, and an upheaval of everything he had meticulously controlled. But there was also something else, something powerful and instinctive, a sense of immediate protectiveness, of a deep-rooted connection he couldn't deny. "What's your names?" he asked, gently folding the letter and placing it carefully into his jacket pocket. "I'm Logan," the tallest said, pointing to himself, then to his brothers. "That's Lucas, and that's Liam." Noah nodded slowly, repeating each name quietly to himself, already feeling their importance settle heavily on his heart. He realized, sitting in the soft light of the restaurant with 3 pairs of frightened eyes looking to him for answers, that his carefully managed life had just fundamentally changed. He didn't know how to be a father. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. All he knew was that he wouldn't run from this, not this time, not from them. Because in their faces, he already saw pieces of himself he hadn't even known he was missing. Noah raised his hand, signaled for the check, and quietly spoke words he knew would reshape the rest of his life. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you home." The drive home felt unusually long, every mile stretching out in tense silence as Noah navigated the darkened streets toward his sprawling mansion. The boys sat quietly in the back seat, their eyes fixed on the windows, taking in the unfamiliar scenery. Occasionally, Noah caught glimpses of their pale reflections in the rearview mirror, 3 small faces blurred slightly by the city lights passing by. He wanted desperately to say something comforting, something reassuring, but he had no idea how to speak to children, especially ones who had just lost their mother. The weight of their grief filled the car, heavy and tangible, and he felt utterly unprepared. When they arrived at the gates of his estate, Noah watched through the mirror as the boy's eyes widened slightly, taking in the vastness of the property. The iron gates swung open, revealing the carefully manicured lawn and the imposing facade of the house. It looked beautiful but cold, grand but lifeless, a house, certainly, but never truly a home. For the first time, Noah felt strangely embarrassed by its emptiness. Inside, the halls echoed softly with their footsteps, highlighting just how large and vacant the space felt. Noah led them toward the guest rooms, unsure exactly what else to do, but wanting to provide them comfort and a sense of safety. He paused at the door of a large, comfortable bedroom that had been decorated by an interior designer he'd barely spoken to. It felt impersonal, but at least it was clean and welcoming. "You can sleep here tonight," Noah said gently. "We'll sort everything else out tomorrow." Logan nodded hesitantly, glancing around the spacious room. Lucas and Liam moved instinctively closer to him, clinging together silently, almost as if they were afraid the other might vanish if they let go. "I'll be right down the hall if you need anything," Noah said softly, forcing himself to smile, hoping it would offer them some comfort. "Thanks," Logan whispered, his voice barely audible. Noah closed the door softly behind him and walked slowly down the hallway, feeling the enormity of the situation pressing down heavily on him. Alone in his room, he sat at the edge of his bed, burying his face in his hands, desperately trying to process everything that had happened. Jessica was gone, leaving behind a secret that had shattered his carefully constructed life. He had 3 sons, 3 living, breathing children whose existence he had never imagined. His phone buzzed angrily on the bedside table, work notifications lighting up one after another, demands from his assistant, unread emails piling up, but he ignored them. None of it seemed remotely important compared to the 3 frightened children sleeping just down the hall. For once in his life, Noah Harris was truly uncertain. Success, wealth, power, none of it had prepared him for this. He barely slept that night, tossing restlessly beneath heavy blankets until the first streaks of morning light slipped through the curtains. When he finally got up, exhaustion hung on him like a physical weight, but he moved deliberately, dressing quickly, determined to find some clarity. Quietly, he walked down the hallway to check on the boys. Peeking into their room, he found all 3 of them asleep together on one large bed, huddled close, their faces calm only in sleep. Noah's heart twisted painfully, guilt mingling with the fierce urge to protect them. By mid-morning, representatives from social services arrived, explaining the harsh realities with clinical detachment, Jessica's sudden death from a brain aneurysm, no known relatives willing or able to take custody, and him listed informally but unmistakably as their father. The officials made it clear, he had the legal right to relinquish custody. The idea briefly flickered through his mind, a momentary panic urging him to return to the simplicity and order of his previous life. But when Logan walked silently into the room, Lucas and Liam close behind, their small faces watching him carefully, all thoughts of retreat vanished. "They're mine," Noah said firmly, meeting the caseworker's gaze directly. "They stay here with me." After they left, Noah sat with the boys in the oversized kitchen, awkwardly preparing breakfast, eggs and toast, slightly burnt, coffee spilled onto the countertop. The boys didn't seem to notice or care. They ate quietly, occasionally glancing up at him as if unsure what to expect next. "You're really our dad?" Lucas asked suddenly, his voice small and tentative. "Yes," Noah replied gently, the word feeling both strange and right. "Your mom and I, we knew each other a long time ago." Liam looked at him, his eyes wide and vulnerable. "Will she come back?" Noah's heart clenched painfully, the innocence in the question breaking something deep inside him. He knelt down, meeting Liam's eyes directly, fighting back the tightness in his throat. "No, Liam," he said softly, his voice barely steady. "But I promise, you're not alone. I'm here now, and I won't leave." They didn't speak much for the rest of the meal, but something shifted slightly between them, as if a tiny foundation of trust had begun to form. Noah knew this was just the beginning, a difficult, messy journey lay ahead. But sitting there, surrounded by three children whose very existence had upended everything he thought he knew about himself, Noah realized he had never been more afraid, nor more certain, of anything in his life. He was their father, unprepared but willing to learn, to fail, and to fight for them. Because for the first time, his life had meaning far beyond the cold definitions of success. The first week was chaos. Not the loud, energetic chaos that came with playtime or laughter, but the quiet, unsettling kind that settles into every corner of a space where no one knows how to be themselves yet. Noah tried to maintain a routine, thinking structure would help. He created a schedule with meals, quiet time, activities, even movie nights. He hired a cook, a private tutor, and a child therapist, all with impressive credentials and calm, professional tones. He thought he was doing everything right. That's what he had always done in business: build systems, hire experts, solve problems. But these weren't problems. They were children. Grieving, scared, overwhelmed children who had just lost their mother and been dropped into a world of glass staircases and silent elevators. Logan was the quietest. He didn't speak unless directly spoken to, and even then, only in short, clipped sentences. He took care of the other two like it was his job, helping them get dressed, tying their shoes, brushing crumbs off their clothes before meals. Lucas was the most inquisitive, always looking around, asking questions when he felt safe, and sometimes touching things just to see what they'd do. Liam cried at night. Every night. Sometimes quietly into his pillow, sometimes in soft sobs that echoed through the hallway. Noah tried to comfort him, but he wasn't sure how. He read online about night terrors, about trauma responses in children, but none of the advice prepared him for the moment Liam crawled into his room at 3 in the morning and curled up on the rug beside his bed without saying a word. Noah didn't move him. He just sat up in the dark, watching the small shape on the floor and wondering how he had gotten so much of life wrong until now. The staff tried to help, but the boys didn't trust them. They weren't rude or disruptive. They were just distant. Polite, quiet, too well-behaved. That was the worst part. These were 6-year-old boys, and they were acting like guests afraid to be sent home. Noah began to realize he had built a palace but not a place where children could live. One afternoon, he overheard Lucas whispering to Liam in their shared room, asking if they'd be moved to another house soon. Liam answered, "Maybe if we're really good, he'll keep us longer." The word struck Noah like a punch to the chest. That night, he dismissed the staff early. He cooked dinner himself, or tried to, grilled cheese and soup, simple enough, but the kitchen filled with smoke, and the soup boiled over. The boys stood nearby, watching wide-eyed. Noah laughed, a little helplessly, and said, "Guess we're learning together." That made Lucas grin for the first time since arriving. After dinner, they sat on the living room floor surrounded by crayons and paper. Noah joined them, drawing clumsy stick figures and asking questions about their favorite colors, animals, movies. It was the first time they responded without looking at each other for permission. Small answers. Simple exchanges. But real. Later, when he walked past their room to say goodnight, he saw all three boys curled up in one bed again, but this time they were talking softly and smiling. Logan looked up and, for the first time, spoke without being asked. "Thanks for dinner," he said. Noah smiled, nodded, and said, "Any time." He didn't sleep that night, but not because of anxiety. He lay awake thinking about how much his life had changed in just a matter of days. He was exhausted, confused, and constantly second-guessing himself, but he also felt something new and unfamiliar, a kind of hope he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, success didn't mean dominance or power. It meant connection. It meant being present. And he realized that if he wanted to be more than just a guardian, if he wanted to truly be their father, he had to stop trying to manage them like a project. He had to start showing up, not just with rules and resources, but with heart. The next morning, he canceled 3 meetings and made pancakes. They were burnt on one side and raw in the middle, but the boys ate every bite and asked if he could try again the next day. He told them he would. And this time, he meant it. By the 4th week, things had begun to settle, at least on the surface. The boys no longer looked like strangers in the hallways of Noah's home. They started calling the rooms by name instead of asking permission before entering them. There were signs of life everywhere: socks left on couches, cereal bowls abandoned on kitchen counters, crayon marks on the dining room table. Noah's pristine mansion was beginning to look like a place where children lived, and for the first time in his life, he didn't mind the mess. In fact, he welcomed it. But beneath the routines and new rhythms, there was still grief, raw, unpredictable, and quietly growing in corners no one wanted to step into. Noah could feel it most in Logan. The oldest of the 3, Logan had assumed the invisible role of protector from the moment they arrived. He watched over Lucas and Liam like it was his responsibility to keep them safe, to make sure nothing bad ever happened again. But the cost of that weight was beginning to show. One evening, after the twins had gone to bed, Noah found Logan sitting alone in the darkened hallway, his knees pulled up to his chest, eyes unfocused. When Noah sat beside him, the boy didn't flinch, but he didn't look at him either. "I was supposed to wake her up," Logan said quietly. But she didn't wake up. Noah didn't speak. He just listened. "I thought if I stayed quiet, took care of the boys, didn't cry, maybe she'd come back," Logan whispered. The words nearly broke Noah. He reached over and gently placed a hand on Logan's shoulder. "It's not your fault," he said. "None of this is your fault." Logan wiped his nose with his sleeve but didn't cry. He just nodded, slowly, like maybe he didn't believe it yet, but wanted to. The next day, Noah called off work again. He canceled meetings, rescheduled calls, and told his assistant to stop filling his calendar with things that didn't matter. He packed up the boys, bought snacks and juice boxes, and drove them out to a nature preserve an hour away from the city. They spent the day walking along trails, skipping rocks across a lake, and sitting on the grass eating crushed sandwiches and laughing about how bad Noah was at throwing a frisbee. That day, something shifted. For the first time, the boys didn't feel like guests. They laughed freely, argued about silly things, and held Noah's hands without thinking twice. On the ride home, Lucas fell asleep against his shoulder, and Liam leaned his head on Noah's arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. Logan sat in the back, staring out the window, but before they pulled into the driveway, he said, "Thanks for today." Noah didn't respond right away. He just looked in the rearview mirror, caught Logan's eyes for a moment, and gave a quiet nod. Later that night, after the boys had gone to bed, Noah sat in his office, staring at an old framed photo of himself from a business magazine feature. He looked successful, sharp, in control. But now it seemed hollow. He reached into his drawer and pulled out another photo, a printed screenshot from a video Jessica had sent him years ago, long before they lost touch. She was laughing in it, holding something just outside the frame. He wondered if it was one of the boys as a baby. He had missed so much. Their first steps, first words, scraped knees and birthday candles. And yet, here he was now, given a second chance. He didn't know how long it would take to earn their trust fully, or if he ever really could. But he knew this, he was no longer just a man with an empty house and a perfect resume. He was a father. And that meant showing up, again and again, even when he didn't have the answers, even when he was scared, even when he failed. So the next morning, when Logan hesitated at the breakfast table before sharing that he had a school project due soon, Noah didn't panic. He smiled and said, "Let's figure it out together." And when Liam asked if they could build a fort in the living room, Noah said yes, even though it meant rearranging half the furniture. And when Lucas spilled juice all over the rug, Noah didn't raise his voice. He knelt down, helped clean it, and asked if he wanted to help make more. They were learning each other slowly. Through pancakes and park trips, through bedtime stories and messes, through tears that didn't need fixing and silences that needed to be held. They weren't a perfect family. But for the first time, they were becoming a real one. By the 5th week, Noah had begun to fall into something resembling fatherhood, though he would never dare call it easy. Every day brought new lessons he hadn't prepared for in small, quiet moments that taught him more than any parenting book ever could. The boys were settling, slowly but visibly. They laughed more. They fought sometimes, like brothers do. They stopped asking if they would be leaving soon. And when one of them called him Dad for the first time, accidentally, instinctively, he didn't correct it. He just froze, heart pounding, unsure whether to acknowledge it or pretend it hadn't happened. But the truth was, it echoed in him for days. Despite progress at home, the outside world had started to push in. His name was still in headlines, some of them kind, others invasive and cruel. Tabloids speculated about the boy's mother, about his sudden disappearance from the business world, and what the scandal meant for investors. Friends from his past life reached out with mixed messages, some congratulatory, others warning him that he was throwing his career away. He ignored them. All of them. What he had now was not a scandal. It was a life finally worth living. The boys had begun attending a small private school not far from their new home. It was quieter than the city schools, with more attention given to emotional needs, which Noah had insisted on. He spent time with their teachers, trying to understand how they were adjusting. Lucas was doing well, social, curious, quick to make friends. Liam was still quiet, shy, a little nervous, but more confident when he was with his brothers. Logan, however, was struggling in ways he didn't always know how to express. Noah got a call from the school one afternoon. Logan had gotten into a fight. When he arrived, Logan sat in the principal's office, arms crossed, lip trembling but eyes defiant. The story was simple. Another student had made a cruel comment about not having a real family, and Logan had snapped. He didn't hit anyone, but he'd shouted and thrown his backpack. Noah didn't scold him. He didn't raise his voice. He just knelt beside his chair and asked quietly, "Did it hurt?" Logan's eyes welled up, and he nodded without speaking. Later, in the car, Noah didn't say much. He waited until they were halfway home before speaking. "You know, when I was a kid, I didn't have a dad either. Not one who stayed. I used to get so mad, I didn't know what to do with it. Logan looked at him, surprised. You? Me, Noah said. I get mad sometimes now, too. But it doesn't make us bad. It just means we care. Logan didn't answer, but when they got home, he walked in without slamming the door. That night, he asked if they could build a treehouse in the backyard. Noah said yes, even though he had no idea how. They started the next day with a hammer, some nails, and an online tutorial. It was uneven, and the first few boards were crooked, but the boys didn't care. They were building something together, something that didn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned soft with color, Noah stood at the base of the unfinished treehouse, watching the boys above him. Logan was giving instructions. Liam was handing up tools. Lucas was singing a made-up song at the top of his lungs. And for a moment, Noah felt something he hadn't known how to name before, belonging. Later that night, when the boys were asleep and the house was finally quiet, he sat alone on the back porch with a cup of tea and opened a small box Jessica's lawyer had sent weeks ago. He had been too afraid to go through it until now. Inside were pieces of her life, photos, letters, a hospital bracelet from the day the boys were born. At the bottom was a small notebook, filled with her handwriting. Journal entries, addressed to them and sometimes to you. She had written about her fears, her hopes, how much she had wanted him to know them. One line stood out, underlined in fading ink, asterisk, they deserve to be loved out loud. Asterisk. Noah closed the notebook gently, his throat tight, eyes stinging. He couldn't undo the years he'd missed. He couldn't go back and rewrite their beginning. But he could give them this chapter. One filled with forts made of blankets, muddy shoes by the door, burned pancakes, whispered bedtime stories, and the kind of love that didn't ask to be earned. He could love them out loud. And he would. Every single day. By the 6th week, the walls Noah had built around himself for years, walls made of steel and silence and long workdays, had finally begun to fall. The boys had found a rhythm in the house, and so had he, though nothing about it was what he would have called smooth. Their mornings were still rushed, socks still went missing, breakfast still burned more often than not, but there was laughter in the chaos, and it made everything feel alive in a way his home never had before. There were arguments too, over toys, over snacks, over who got the last seat in the car, but even those arguments felt real, normal, like family. One evening, after a particularly long day of school runs and grocery errands and assembling IKEA furniture for Liam's new bookshelf, Noah found himself sitting on the living room floor surrounded by toys, broken crayons, and the muffled sound of the boys playing upstairs. He leaned his head back against the couch and let out a long breath. His muscles ached, his shirt was stained, and he was fairly certain he hadn't had a full meal all day. But he felt at peace. And then his phone buzzed. At first, he ignored it, assuming it was another unwanted call from someone in his corporate circle trying to lure him back into a life he no longer wanted. But when he finally checked it, the screen lit up with a name he hadn't seen in years, Ethan Grant, one of his oldest business partners, a man who had once been closer to him than a brother and who had now called him exactly 0 times since he left the company. He hesitated, then answered. Ethan's voice was casual at first, warm even, asking how Noah had been, how the boys were, how he was adjusting. But it didn't take long for the real purpose of the call to emerge. The board wanted him back. Investors were growing uneasy. The company wasn't the same without his leadership, and they needed a face to restore confidence. He could work remotely. He didn't need to be full-time. Just visible. Just present enough to settle the noise. Ethan called it a win-win. Noah felt something tighten in his chest. He listened politely. He asked questions. He gave vague answers. But inside, he felt himself splitting. There was a version of him that could easily say yes. The one that had always chosen work first. That version still knew how to speak the language of strategy and scale and quarterly projections. But the version sitting in that living room, surrounded by crayon drawings and sticky Lego bricks, was different. That version didn't want to go back. That version had found something better. After he hung up, he went upstairs. The boys were in pajamas, brushing teeth with more toothpaste on their faces than in their mouths. He sat on the floor in the hallway while they finished and, without fully meaning to, asked, "If I had to go back to work more, would you be okay?" Liam looked up first, wide-eyed. "Would you still make breakfast?" "Most days," Noah said. Lucas joined in. "What about the treehouse?" "I wouldn't miss that." Then Logan stepped out of the bathroom and leaned against the wall, his face unreadable for a moment. "Are you asking if we'd be okay, or if you'd be okay?" he said. Noah was stunned into silence. Not because the question was unfair, but because it was true. He didn't answer that night. He just helped them into bed, pulled the blankets up to their chins, and sat with them until their breathing slowed. Logan didn't fall asleep right away. He lay staring at the ceiling for a while, then said, "We don't need you to be everywhere. We just need to know you'll come back." That sentence stayed with Noah long after the room had gone dark. The next morning, he called Ethan back and said no. He didn't explain. He didn't make excuses. He just said he couldn't. And when Ethan tried to argue, Noah calmly ended the call and turned off the phone. That afternoon, he picked the boys up from school and took them out for ice cream, even though it was a Wednesday and it was cold outside. They sat on a bench with their coats zipped up to their noses, laughing between bites, getting sticky chocolate on their gloves. Noah looked at them and knew, he hadn't walked away from his life. He had finally walked into it. By the 7th week, Noah had grown into the shape of a father, not perfectly, not without fear, but with a quiet determination that surprised even himself. The boys had grown more confident in their routines, more expressive in their emotions, and more at ease with the man who had once been a stranger. The mansion that had once echoed with loneliness now echoed with footsteps and laughter, with Nerf darts stuck in corners and drawings taped to refrigerator doors. There was warmth in the chaos, and for the first time in years, Noah welcomed unpredictability. He no longer felt like he was simply filling a role. He was becoming someone new, someone softer and stronger at the same time. But with that comfort came something else, grief. It was no longer the kind of grief that came in sharp bursts, but a quieter, slower ache. The kind that showed up in small ways, like the way Liam still hesitated before saying, "Dad," or the way Logan sometimes stared at the door when he thought no one noticed, as if still expecting Jessica to walk through it. The boys didn't talk about their mother often, and Noah didn't push. He answered their questions honestly when they came, and he left space for silence when they didn't. But he knew there was more that needed to be said, things they were holding in because they were afraid that saying them out loud might break something. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Logan came to him with a box. It was small, made of faded cardboard, edges frayed, and Noah recognized it immediately as one of the boxes Jessica's lawyer had sent weeks ago. It had been buried in a closet with other belongings they hadn't known what to do with yet. Logan held it carefully, almost reverently. "Can we go through it?" he asked. "Together?" Noah nodded, not trusting his voice. They sat on the floor in the living room, the rain tapping softly against the windows, and opened the box. Inside were pieces of Jessica's life, photos of her with the boys as babies, birthday cards, handwritten notes, a tiny stuffed rabbit that was missing an ear, and finally, a sealed envelope with Logan's name on it. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. It wasn't long. Just a few lines in her handwriting. Logan read it silently, lips moving, eyes blinking hard. When he was done, he handed the letter to Noah without a word, and Noah read it too. Logan, I knew you'd be the strong one. I'm sorry for that. I know you felt like you had to take care of your brothers when it should have been me. But now you have him. Let him help. Let yourself be little sometimes. You deserve that. I love you. Always, Mom. Asterisk. Noah couldn't breathe for a moment. He looked at Logan, who sat stiffly beside him, holding back everything. Without thinking, Noah reached over and pulled him into a hug. And for the first time since they'd met, Logan didn't resist it. He leaned into it. He let himself be held. That night, Logan crawled into Noah's bed in the middle of the night, not because of a nightmare, but just because. Noah didn't ask why. He simply moved over and made space. In the morning, Logan was still asleep, curled under the blanket with his hand loosely gripping Noah's shirt. Noah lay still, watching him breathe, and thought about all the years he had missed and all the years they still had ahead of them. Later that day, they went to the park. Not because it was planned or scheduled, but because the sun came out and the boys wanted to ride their bikes. Noah sat on a bench, coffee in hand, watching them fly past him, laughing, shouting each other's names. A woman sat down beside him, glancing at the boys. "Yours?" she asked with a smile. Noah looked at them, then nodded. "Yeah," he said. "They are." She smiled again, but he wasn't really looking at her anymore. He was watching Logan help Liam back onto his bike after he fell, watching Lucas race ahead and then loop back just to be sure his brothers were okay. They weren't perfect. They were still healing. But they were his. And for the first time, he didn't feel like he had to prove it. He just felt it. Quiet, steady, and real. The 8th week didn't begin with anything extraordinary. There was no grand moment, no big decision, no shift in the weather to mark what was coming. It began with breakfast, pancakes a little too brown on the edges, orange juice in mismatched cups, and 3 boys fighting over who got the last strawberry. It was loud and messy and very much theirs. Noah stood at the stove in his pajamas, flipping the last pancake while half listening to the chaos behind him. A few months ago, the noise would have irritated him. Now, it was the sound of home. Later that day, Liam had a school performance. It wasn't anything elaborate, just a spring recital with songs and paper crowns and children waving at their parents in the crowd. Noah sat in the 3rd row, surrounded by other parents with phones raised, but his stayed in his pocket. He didn't want to see the moment through a screen. He wanted to remember it exactly as it was, Liam standing there, small and serious, mouthing the words to a song about sunshine and friendship, eyes searching the room until they landed on Noah, and then lighting up with a quiet, shy smile. It was just one look, a flicker, but it was everything. Afterward, Noah took all 3 boys out for ice cream, even though it wasn't planned and even though it was already getting late. They sat on a bench outside the shop, wiping sticky fingers on napkins and arguing about whose cone was the biggest. Lucas, as always, insisted his was smaller, even when it wasn't. Logan said nothing, but he kept sneaking glances at Noah in a way that meant something was building. On the drive home, it came out. "I found another letter," Logan said from the back seat. "From Mom. It's for you." Noah glanced in the mirror, surprised, but said nothing. When they got home, Logan handed him the envelope. The boys ran off to their room, leaving Noah alone with the letter. He sat on the edge of the couch, slowly tearing it open, already bracing himself. The handwriting was familiar. Flowing. Calm. Noah. Asterisk if you're reading this, I guess the universe decided it was time. I hope the boys are okay. I hope they're safe. I hope they've laughed since I left. I hope you've forgiven me, asterisk. Asterisk I didn't tell you because I was scared. Not of you, but of losing the illusion that I could do it all on my own. I didn't want to need anyone. You understand that, don't you? You always lived like that too. But the truth is, no one does this alone. Especially not raising children. They needed you, and I think, maybe you needed them too, asterisk. I hope you found a way to love them without conditions. I hope they've taught you to slow down. And if they've called you, Dad, even once, then I know you've become who I always hoped you would be, asterisk. Asterisk, thank you for showing up. That's what matters. Not perfectly. Just fully, asterisk. Jessica. Noah sat with the letter in his lap for a long time, the quiet around him thick with memory and emotion. He didn't cry. He just let the words settle into him like a weight and a comfort at the same time. Jessica had seen him clearly, even after all those years. And she had trusted him with what mattered most. That trust, that final act of faith, had changed his life. The next morning, something shifted. Nothing dramatic, nothing the boys would even notice, but inside Noah, something let go. The guilt, the fear, the part of him that kept waiting for someone to say he wasn't enough, all of it loosened its grip. He had made mistakes. He'd missed the beginning. But he was here now, and that was what mattered. He took the day off. They all did. He packed the car with snacks and jackets and drove them to the lake an hour outside the city. They spent the day skipping stones, building forts out of sticks, and eating sandwiches that had been squished in the cooler. They got dirt on their shoes and sunburned cheeks. They were loud and free and completely unbothered by anything beyond that moment. Later that evening, as the sky turned soft and golden, Noah watched his sons run ahead on the trail, shouting over each other about who would win the race to the car. He let them go, walking slowly behind, holding the folded letter in his jacket pocket. He had once thought his legacy would be built in boardrooms, through deals and numbers and clean suits. But here, watching three boys who had once looked at him like a stranger now calling him Dad, without hesitation, he knew the truth. His legacy was being written in scraped knees and bedtime stories, in quiet reassurances and patient understanding, in a love he never expected but couldn't imagine living without. It wasn't the life he had built for himself. It was better. And this was just the beginning. What makes the ending of this story so powerful isn't just that Noah becomes a father, it's how he becomes one. Not through blood alone, but through presence, patience, and the willingness to grow into something he never imagined himself capable of. The transformation isn't sudden or cinematic. It happens in small, quiet moments, learning how to burn pancakes, showing up at school recitals, choosing bedtime stories over board meetings. That's where the real love takes root, not in the dramatic revelations, but in the daily choice to stay, to listen, and to care. Noah's journey is one of redemption, not because he did something wrong, but because he finally realized that success without connection is empty. The story begins with a man who has everything but doesn't feel much at all, and ends with a man who has traded control for chaos, solitude for sticky fingers and late-night hugs, and gained a life richer than anything money could have built. The happy ending doesn't come because everything is perfect. It comes because it's real. And in a world where people are often too afraid to choose love after loss or too busy to pause for what matters, Noah chooses to show up. Again and again. That's the kind of ending that stays with you. Because it's not really an ending at all, it's a beginning. One built on heart, healing, and the beautiful, messy truth of family.